Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Comedy. We're not going to waste any time. Top 50 tips, and I'll give you a little brief description of each of them. Let's get started. Tip number 1, write down your jokes and practice them beforehand. Even if in the future you would like to be the comedian that walks on stage and improvises their way through an entire set, that's fantastic. But at the moment, especially if you're only starting, it's really important to learn the discipline of writing out the material before you go on stage, learning it, saying it over and over again before you get on the stage, so that when you do get on stage, you're not overthinking about what word comes next. Instead, you're focusing on the important part, which is performing to the audience. Tip number 2, start with short sets to build up your confidence. Even if you're giving a 5-minute spot, I would urge you to do 4 minutes 15 seconds, 4 minutes 30 seconds. Later on down the road, when you're a pro performer, you can stick exactly to time, and performing on stage over and over again will get you better at timing out your sets. But at the beginning, it's really important to stick to short sets. Go easy on yourself. Don't go up with too much material. Instead, go up with material you can easily remember, easily manage, and perform well in front of an audience. Tip number 3, tailor your jokes to the audience in front of you. Now, how do you do that if you write the set at home and then the audience turns up in the night? Well, it's very simple. Pay attention to them as they walk into the room. As they walk into the venue and get their seats, pay attention to what kind of people they are. You might be able to have some time and jot down a few funny pieces of information about the setting, about the surroundings, and about the people who are in front of you. You might be able to tailor 1 or 2 of your jokes to specifically the audience in the room, only with a slight tweak. This will make you stand leaps and bounds ahead of all the other comedians on the bill, especially at an open mic level where they will not be thinking about this tip. Tailor your jokes to the audience and they will love you for it. Tip number 5, use personal experiences to add charisma and authenticity to your performance and material. By being honest and true to yourself and speaking about the things you really genuinely like to do, well, it's going to open up you in a much friendlier way. And the opposite to this is if you get on stage and just complain about everything. It's perfectly fine to complain about things in your material, but I would say leave that till much later on. Instead, focus on the things that you like to talk about. If you focus on the things you like to talk about, you will come across as a much friendlier person to your audience, and in return, they will like you for it. If they like you, they will laugh more quickly at your jokes. Tip number 6. Take risks and try new things. If something works, change it ever so slightly, but keep changing it, keep adding to it, keep spicing up your set. You should always feel the butterflies in your stomach before every single gig you do. If you don't, it means that you've started performing a routine that does not push you anymore. Keep taking risks and keep feeling the fear before going on stage. Otherwise, what the hell is the point? And if you keep feeling the fear, you're always going to get better and improve. Tip number 7, don't be afraid to bomb. It happens to absolutely everybody. After a few years of experience, you're not really going to mind too much about bombing in front of the audience. The only thing you're going to look forward doing is going back to your pen and paper and figuring out why you bombed and how can you fix it in the future. Tip number 8, record your sets and watch them back. It's not good enough just to record a set and leave it on the laptop and never look at it again because you're just too humiliated to see what is going to be on the footage. You need to watch it back and learn and improve. And I do not mean just the audio as well. I mean watch the entire thing back because you need to understand your body language as well as the message in what you are saying. They all need to be in line with each other, and if you don't like watching it, then the audience simply isn't going to watch it either. And after a while of watching your material back, it actually becomes very, very easy and you no longer feel embarrassed about it. Everybody doesn't like watching themselves back at the beginning, but with a little bit of experience and practice, it's going to be perfectly fine and you're going to be able to correct the wrong things you did on stage because there's always something worth correcting. Tip number 9. Use facial expressions and body language to enhance your performance. This goes along easily with the previous tip. While you're watching yourself back, you can pick up on some things that you're doing with your body that the audience is opening up to. Or you can exaggerate a story even more and get better pauses and better results out of expressing the story with your body as well as you're saying it. And the easiest way of doing this is while you're practicing your set at home to have a microphone in your hand. Even if it's not a microphone, it can be a pretend microphone, hold something in your hand and really feel like you're on the stage rather than just aimlessly going through the notes and saying the words to yourself that you're going to say on stage. I want you to actually act out like you're on stage and move in the same way you would. That will enhance your practice and it will really benefit you when you go on stage. Tip number 10, engage with the audience and build rapport. It's a really nice idea at the beginning of a set, especially just to open up and have a few words of conversation with the audience. Then in your own time, wherever you see fit, you can drag that conversation you're having with them and mention something that you are going to cover later on in your material. This will have a really lovely transition from talking to them to talking about your written material. Nobody will notice and it will all seem very smooth of a transition. A really nice way of opening up the beginning of your set and getting all the focus on you, which is what the beginning of your set should all be about. Tip number 11. You've got past tip number 10. That means that you're watching longer than the majority of people who click on my videos. If so, it might be because you're getting some value from the video. All you have to do is hit subscribe. This video nearly killed me. Just hit subscribe button. Let me know you're out there and I really appreciate it. Let's get back on to the tips. Use pauses to build up anticipation. Now, obviously, this is done before punchlines to have a little bit of a pause and then hit them with the punchline, hopefully getting a great laugh. But this can also be done even in the middle of setting them up and telling a story. You can all of a sudden stop and start talking slower, and talking slower creates a little bit more attention in the room and a lot more focus on what you are saying. Tip number 12, find a unique angle on common topics to stand out. So if you have a very common topic that most people cover and most people have a very certain way of looking at it, I want you to take a very different approach to looking at that topic. Give an absolutely absurd perception of a common topic, it will get a lot of laughs. Tip number 13, keep your material fresh by updating it as regularly as you can. I would urge you to change one thing every single time you go on stage, but if you can't do that, certainly every 2 or 3 times you go on stage, you should have a little bit of a new piece of material or a change joke in there. Even if something is working well, it can always be working 3 to 5% better. So you need to continuously look at your set and update it. Tip number 14, watch and learn from other comedians. You should be enjoying watching comedy. At home or any chance you get, you should watch the classics and find new comedians to follow all the time. And more importantly, while you're at the venue, watch the comedians that are on your scene. Watch the comedians in your own community. There's a lot to be learned from them. There's vast amount of styles at any open mic gig you're going to go to. And what better place than to sit back and enjoy the comedy from yourself. You're going to benefit from it and they are going to appreciate another comedian actually enjoying their set rather than being at the back of the room stealing most of their jokes. Tip number 15, use callbacks and tie your jokes together. Now, a callback is when you bring an old idea that you've already discussed back into the set later on in a humorous way. How is this connected to this? Well, it's up to your writing and how funny and absurd you can be with it. But use callbacks to tie your set together. It's a really, really fun and quite an easy way of getting more time out of one idea. Tip number 16, practice your delivery to make your jokes more impactful. Now, what this means is while you're at home and you're running through your set, I want you to take out the build-up and the punchline to every single one of your jokes and practice them individually. That's practicing. You're practicing the punch. Rehearsing is when you're practicing the entire set. So just like a guitar player or a musician or an athlete of any sort, they're going to practice very small pieces of the entire puzzle. And I want you to do the same. Really understand how you're going to deliver the important pieces of information. And the stories and the building of tension will kind of look after themselves if you figure out where the funny is. Tip number 17. Make fun of yourself towards the beginning of the set. This will open up people to understand that you do not take yourself that seriously. And if you can laugh at yourself, brilliant. They will laugh at you in time. Also, if you're the kind of act that likes to make fun of other people, it's really important you make fun of yourself first. That way, well, I've already made fun of myself. Now it's time I make fun of this. Rather than if you seem like you cannot take a joke on yourself, they're not going to open up to the idea of you making fun with anyone else anytime soon. So make fun of yourself and they will open up to you. Tip number 18. Use surprise and misdirection to catch the audience off guard. This could be as simple as telling them what you do for a job and then saying an absolutely absurd reason as to why you like that job. Or it can also be the fact that maybe you have the most absurd, made up, fictitious job in the world, and that in itself can be a punchline, and there could be very normal reasons around that. So if you have an audience listening to what you're saying, drag them down one path and then completely change it when they are not expecting it, and they will appreciate you for it. Tip number 19, use humor to address serious issues. If you're the kind of person who wants to go up and talk about serious issues, it's really important that you make funny be the main part of your set. Make sure that you know and that they know you're there to entertain first and get your point across second. Tip number 20, use local references to connect with the audience. This is absolutely brilliant thing to use, especially if you don't like talking to the audience. You can just talk about the room you're in. You can talk about the area in which the gig is happening. You can talk about the bar upstairs or downstairs. You can talk about all of these things, the pictures on the wall. You can talk about the mirrors in the room or the quality of the equipment you're using. And you can do it in a funny way, make jokes about it. This will open up the room because that is the only thing that you all have in common. It's your surrounding. So if you make fun of it, you will get laughs really, really quick. A fantastic way of warming the audience up to you at the beginning of your set. Tip number 21, use exaggeration to create absurd scenarios. And this is for the absurd kind of comedians. If I would urge you to go all out. Maybe it's a job, maybe it's the relationship you're having, maybe it's your education, maybe it's the idea and reason of why you became a comedian. I want you to tell them the most ridiculous story ever and make it funny, make it absurd, and that is a huge, fantastic way of entertaining an audience, and it's not done enough, so you might stand out as being the only person on the entire bill who has an absolutely ridiculous story, and they will even like the fact that sometimes it's so clearly made up, because a clearly fictitious story has no limits and no boundaries and no rules as to where it's going to go next, so you can be as creative as you want. Tip number 22, use storytelling to create a narrative in your set. If you're not that absurd, you can still make a story. You can still tell them what happened to you in your life, in your day, or in any area of your life. So if you have a couple of one-liners, they can become a story in themselves. All you have to do is just put them into your day or whatever your story is about and make a story from punchline 1 to punchline 2. It doesn't need to even make that much sense if you want to go the absurd way, and then if you can make sense of it and you would rather not go the absurd way, well then you can do that as well. Tip number 23, incorporate current events into your set. Just like using the room and talking about the immediate surroundings, it's also a fantastic idea to talk about what's going on in current events. Now, of course, you want to keep it light if you're that sort of comedian. I would urge you at certainly the beginning of your career to keep it light, but it's always nice to throw in events that everybody is already talking about. Especially now, they probably are talking about current events even before the show begins. So by you bringing it up and having a funny thing to say about it is going to be another way of breaking the tension and getting them on your side, especially at the beginning of your set. Tip number 24, write 3 punchlines for every joke. And that way, when you deliver one and it gets a nice laugh, you can give them the second just when the laugh is beginning to break down. And then, what's better yet, 3 is a magic number, give them the third just when that laugh is from the second is beginning to break down again. And these punchlines can be very similar to each other, only with slight differences. I guarantee you, have 3 punchlines is going to benefit you much better than just having one. And if you think the gig is going in a way that only one is enough, well then just don't say the other 2, but definitely be creating more punchlines all the time for all of your jokes, because they are there to be discovered. Tip number 25. Once you've established what pace you like to perform at, I want you to throw up the tempo and change it now and then. And I want you to do so also with the type of patter you're saying. I really want you to improvise and experiment with the way of communicating to the audience and using the microphone and using your body. By changing it up, you're always attacking their senses and getting the focus on you. Do not want an audience to get relaxed with the way you present yourself on stage. You always want to be breaking the focus and getting all of the attention on you. And the best way of doing that is changing it up with the comedic rhythm. Here is tip number 26. Use irony to create humorous contrasts. By being purposely incredibly ironic, you can come across as a person who's completely ignorant and you don't know yourself. And as long as you've won them over in the beginning, they'll all know it's all fun and games and it's a lot of fun to play with. Irony is key. Go for it. Tip number 27. Use props and costumes to enhance your performance. You don't even need to be a very physical act to get away with this, but if you think a costume or a prop is going to enhance your performance even better, then absolutely get it, bring it on stage, and have fun with it. Tip number 28. Use physical comedy. If you're the kind of act that wants to go on stage with slapstick style material and fall around the place, that is fantastic. But I'll say this, go all out, go overboard, commit to it 100%. It's not good enough just to commit to it a little bit. If that's the act you want to do, everyone who's been successful doing that style has shown you that it needs to be done 100% and be as absurd and be the clown in the room. It's a perfectly fantastic way of doing stand-up comedy. It's not done all that often again, so you're going to stand out. Definitely, you're not going to get two comedians on one bill that just rely on physical comedy. So if that's an avenue you want to go down, absolutely do it. Tip number 30. Use shock value sparingly. What that means is at the beginning of your career, it's not a good idea to go up and try and shock your audience. It should be about entertainment first. And at the beginning of your career, you haven't yet learned how to do shocking material and make it funny. So I would say use it sparingly. If you really, really must go up and really try and express yourself in a shocking way, do so. But try and make them laugh first. Do not go up on stage and shock them straight out the gate. They are all going to turn on you very, very quickly. That leads me into tip number 31. Use insults sparingly. Do not walk up on stage and immediately insult the first few people that you talk to. Instead, get them to like you. It's really, really important. If you have to offend somebody in your set, do it after you spoke to them, you've gotten a few laughs off nice material, you've won them over a good bit, and then maybe experiment with offending someone. But what I would say is leave that to much further down the road, and by the time you get there and you are able to offend people, you might not even want to do it, because most of the professional comedians that seem like they're offending people actually aren't. They're able to get away with doing it in a way that doesn't offend. Tip number 32, be authentic and true to yourself. After every single gig you do, you should be proud with who you are and what material you're all about when you're on stage. If you're not, then a lot of things need to be changed. You can't just go up and perform comedy that doesn't mean anything to you. It needs to connect with you, and you need to be able to express yourself on that stage. Forget about who's successful, forget about who you want to be like in terms of fame or in terms of reach. Forget all that. Go up and be true to yourself, and the rest will fall into place. Tip number 33 is to be present and react to what's happening in the room. It's not good enough just to go up stage and get through your material as quick and as rigid as you possibly can. If someone says something in the room or if something happens in the room, you need to be able to address it, because everybody else has broken the tension, broken the focus, and they're probably paying attention to whatever is going on in the room. So always be aware of your surroundings. Take time to warm up your body and voice before going on stage. Just a couple of simple stretches, get the blood flowing, warm your body up, and then a few very simple hums. Over a period of about maybe a minute and a half, it'll warm up your vocal cords and you'll be able to talk a lot more clearly into the microphone. Tip number 34 is to approach the stage different than the other acts that have gone before you. If all the acts are coming up from stage right onto the stage, grabbing the microphone and talking, you're going to come up through the audience on the stage left. Perhaps it takes you a lot longer to get there and you have to move a lot of people out of the way. Also perfectly fine if you can put it off in a funny way. But always be thinking about, how can I do my performance different? There's going to be a lot of comedians on the bill. You want to be the one that stands out. So think about approaching the set very, very different, even in a literal way. Tip number 35. Include the audience into your jokes and stories. This could be as simple as pretending that a person in the second row on stage right was the person that you were talking about in the joke. A really, really funny way of bringing the material into the room and what you're talking about to get everyone on board. And also a very funny way of making fun and having fun with an audience member that might not be very offensive. So include them in the story in some weird and funny fictional way. Tip number 36, use humor to diffuse awkward moments. So if you can purposely create an awkward moment, well, then you can also write a joke that will diffuse the situation. A lot of fun to play with. Perhaps you're going to have an awkward moment between two audiences and you're going to set that up. Well, if you're the one to set it up, you can have a punchline about it, all done in your practice session, and it seems spontaneous at the gig. Tip number 36. In most comedy venues, they're small. You do not need to always be using the mic. If you start your set and you start talking to the audience even before you get to the microphone, that is going to create a hell of a lot of tension. And if you can win them over before you even get to the microphone, you're winning from there. Tip number 37, use facial expressions and gestures. This is really important, and it can also be perfected if you watch your set back. You need to use facial expressions to enhance the jokes that you're talking about. If you're a deadpan act, you need to work on your deadpan expression as well. No matter what kind of an act you are, you should be looking at yourself in the mirror and on video and really see, what is your face saying? What is your face saying to the audience, and is it in line with the message you're trying to send out? Tip number 38, be aware of the audience's mood and adjust your material accordingly. This is like a previous tip in where you're going to change the jokes to suit your audience, but that's more about how they come across and how they are perceived. What I also want you to do is, if the night isn't going too well, maybe some of your jokes won't work that well and they need to be changed, even so slightly, before you go on stage. Always be paying attention to what the audience are perceiving well. Always be paying attention to what kind of acts that they're responding to best, and then you can get ahead of the game and change even ever so slightly a little bit of your jokes to suit them. Tip number 38, practice good stage presence by standing straight up and looking your audience in the eyes. Now, if you're a really shy act and you do not like looking at them directly in the eyes, there is a little trick. You can look at everyone right in the forehead or just over their head. And to the audience, that appears like you're looking at everybody in the eyes when actually you're not. But if you can look at them in the eyes, it's going to be better. And look at them in the eyes for about 3 to 4 seconds per person, and then move to a different section of the room. Not move to their neighbor, but a whole different section of the room, and try and cover as many people with this technique as possible. I've lost count. Use personal stories to give your set a personal touch. Even if you don't have much jokes in a story, it's really good to go up and find out what it's like to tell an audience something that really truly happened to you, and a story that you've told friends in the past before. This will get you really good at communicating with an audience, even outside of being funny. And if you get really relaxed at telling the story, you're going to start adding your jokes into the set, even if you didn't write them. You're going to get so relaxed because you've told the story to friends, and now all you're doing is tweaking it around the edges and getting used to telling it in front of an audience. So bring personal stories with you onto the stage and have a lot of fun telling them. Tip number, 41. Always have a clear message about what your material is going to be about. If it's clear to you, it's going to be clear to the audience. Do not confuse them. Do not have too many different types of material to cover in one set. If you're doing a 5-minute set, I would just say stick around 2 or 3 at the very most topics of interest, and 1 if you can get away with it. But do not overload your set talking about everything you can think about. Tip number 42, look at your set from different angles all the time. Always get humor, always have a voice for the opposing side as to what your side is. This not only is this a fantastic idea for a creating session, but it's really a lot of fun for an audience to witness a person changing their mind about something midway through their set. So have a lot of fun with that. Always look at your material from as many angles as you possibly can. Tip number 43, edit your material. Edit, edit, edit. Always be editing your material. Always be changing it up. Even if you can do so on the fly, that will be brilliant if you're on stage and you can just last minute change the direction of your joke and really start to take risks. Edit your material all the time. Always be making it better. Tip number 43, use words to create vivid imagery. If you're talking about a story or you're telling the audience about something you want them on board with, you need to be thinking about the words you're saying. They need to really paint a picture in the audience's head. You can't just describe something for the sake of describing it, only to want to get to the punchline of what it's about. They need to be on board at the setup. They need to be on board throughout the story, and if they're on board throughout the entire process, they're going to be on board when it matters, which is the punchline. So always be painting the most clear picture for your audience possible. Tip number 44, avoid cliches and overused jokes. If you're going to have material about common day occurrences and pop culture, you need to make sure that it's not already been spoken about by everybody who you've met. Come up with a new and unique way of seeing things, and it will benefit you greatly. Tip number 45 is to be open to criticism, and you're going to get it. You're going to get comedians telling you their version of what you should be doing. Always listen to them. You don't have to change your material depending on what they say, but always listen to them. Always just be grateful, even if you do not agree with what they're saying. Just smile, be grateful, and move on. There's no point in making enemies, and every now and then, and I guarantee you this is true, every now and then they're going to say something that is golden, and especially if they've got a lot more years on you, they are most likely telling the truth. Tip number 45 is to use the stage in playful ways. As long as you're always staying in front of the lights and can be seen, I want you to play with the surroundings. If the stage is big, feel free to use some of it. If the stage is small, feel free to get off the stage and approach the audience while you're performing material. The whole room is your stage to perform at. And make sure you're always in focus of the audience, but also make sure you're playing with the surroundings. Brings me to tip number 46. Control the pacing. Even if you are moving around a lot and you want to use some of the space, don't do so in a way that's going to lose the focus. If the audience finds it hard to follow you in terms of your material, or in a physical sense that you're just running around so much that you seem to be very anxious, well, they're going to think that's what you are, and they're not going to open up to you. So use your pacing wisely, but do play with your surroundings. Tip number 47 is maintain the energy and focus throughout your entire set. Just because you've done the first part of your set successfully and now you're into the written material part, it doesn't mean you can afford to go robotic. You still need to be expressing the material of which you've practiced, and you still need to be finding the engagement every single second you can. Tip number 48. Do not bring a notepad up on stage. I know sometimes if it's just new material you're after, it's very, very easy just to have it right there, but I would urge you this: don't bring it up on stage. Instead, learn it off at home. And if you forget what you are written on stage and you kind of have a blank moment, that's perfectly fine. Come up with something on the spot. By forcing yourself to come up with something funny on the spot to say, that is going to benefit you down the line because you're going to get quicker at it, rather than just relying on taking a notepad out of your pocket and looking at it. They're not going to like that, so instead, leave the notepad on the seat or at home. Tip number 49 is to always get to the venue very early. This way, you can suss out the entire room and suss out the audience coming in. All of the tips we've covered earlier on, you can suss out and get ahead of the game by being there early. Also, the booker is going to appreciate it because they don't need to worry about one of their acts not being on time, and let everyone else be a little bit late. Because the last thing you want to do is leave it a little late only to be delayed and arrive after the gig has started. Get to it early. Mingle with all the people, as many as you can, win them over even before your set starts. Tip number 50, it is to enjoy comedy. If you find you're leaving a night and you're not happy, well then something needs to be addressed. You need to be enjoying comedy. Now that might seem like it's obvious, that might seem like, well, of course we all enjoy it, but you'd be surprised about the amount of people I now can see are simply clearly not enjoying what they're doing. Instead, they're bitter because it never worked out for them, and for some reason they're continuing it on. But I do feel that even if you find yourself bitter and out of love with it, a few tweaks can get you back in love with it again and performing better. If you don't love it, you're not going to rise up through the ranks. So always continue to find ways of loving what we do. It's a fantastic job. We make a lot of people happy doing it, and you must be the person you make happiest out of doing it. And that is 50. This video has pretty much driven me insane to get right for you. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm going to bed. See you in the next one.